In the Middle Ages, a period spanning approximately 1,000 years of history, many practices and beliefs that we now consider absurd were perfectly normal. This era, characterized by a worldview deeply influenced by religion, superstition, and limited scientific knowledge, gave rise to behaviors and institutions that today seem incredible. In this video, we will delve into 10 of these practices and beliefs to better understand the context in which they developed. Number 10. Hand-cutting for thieves. In the Middle Ages, theft was considered one of the most serious and dishonorable crimes, often punished with extreme brutality. In many European regions, the punishment for thieves was the cutting off of a hand, a practice that dates back to an ancient tradition of severe justice. This type of mutilation not only inflicted immediate physical pain, but also left a permanent scar that marked the criminal for the rest of their life, serving as a warning to the community. The cutting off of a hand was seen as a means to deter other potential thieves by depriving the offender of the ability to commit further thefts. However, this practice was also deeply inhumane and cruel, reflecting a concept of justice that today seems entirely unacceptable. Over time, with the evolution of ideas about justice and humanity, such forms of punishment have been gradually abandoned in favor of fairer and less barbaric methods. Number 9. Artisan secrets. In the Middle Ages, artisan guilds were powerful and influential organizations that grouped craftsmen of specific trades, such as blacksmiths, masons, goldsmiths, and weavers. These guilds were not only early forms of trade unions, but also custodians of technical and professional knowledge passed down from generation to generation. The secrets of the trade, often jealously guarded, represented the core of the guild's power. Access to such knowledge was strictly controlled, reserved only for initiates who underwent a long apprenticeship under the supervision of masters. Violating trade secrets, perhaps by revealing them to non-members or foreigners, could result in severe punishments, ranging from expulsion from the guild to social excommunication, or in extreme cases, even death. This protection of secrets ensured not only the quality of products, but also market control and the defense of the guild's economic interests. Number 8. The excommunication of inanimate objects. Excommunication was not limited to people. In the Middle Ages, within a cultural context heavily influenced by religion, the Church attributed moral and spiritual significance to many natural phenomena and inanimate objects. Thus, crops afflicted by disease, infested animals, or even objects deemed cursed could be excommunicated. This ritual was seen as an act of exorcism, aimed at driving away evil or placating divine wrath. The excommunication of objects could also be used to resolve social conflicts or explain natural events that were incomprehensible according to the scientific knowledge of the time. For example, if an agricultural community suffered severe crop losses, the clergy might interpret this event as a sign of divine displeasure and attempt to remedy it through excommunication rituals and prayers, hoping to restore divine favor. Number 7. Marriage as an economic contract. In the Middle Ages, marriage was much more than a romantic union. It was primarily a social and economic contract. Families, especially among the nobility and merchant classes, used marriages as tools to form political alliances, consolidate power, and increase wealth. The spouses, often very young, had little say in the matter, as marriage decisions were made by family heads who carefully considered dowries, property, and social connections. Romantic love, when it existed, was often secondary and sometimes completely absent in the choice of a spouse. At the center of these arrangements was the marriage contract, a legal document outlining the terms of the union, including property rights, dowries, and mutual obligations. This contractual aspect of marriage underscored its predominantly pragmatic nature, where love was often a luxury not accounted for in the initial agreement. Number 6. The treatment of mental illness. People with mental illnesses in the Middle Ages were generally misunderstood and feared. Mental illness was often interpreted as a manifestation of demonic possession, leading to extremely cruel and inhumane treatments. Individuals suffering from such disorders were subjected to exorcisms, confined in institutions similar to prisons, or even tortured in an attempt to free them from the supposed evil spirits. These practices reflected the deep ignorance of the time regarding mental illnesses, which were not recognized as medical conditions, but rather as spiritual or moral problems. The suffering of individuals with mental illnesses was exacerbated by social isolation and stigmatization, and it was only with the Renaissance and the advent of more scientific approaches to medicine that more humane and understanding treatment methods began to develop. Number 5, the barber surgeon. In the medieval context, the role of the barber was much more complex and varied than we might imagine today. In addition to cutting hair and shaving beards, barbers also served as makeshift surgeons. Lacking formal medical training, they performed procedures such as bloodletting, tooth extraction, and wound care. This dual function arose from the fact that trained physicians were few and often reserved for the elite, while barber surgeons were accessible to the common people. The tools they used, often rudimentary, were also employed for surgical tasks, and their methods were based more on traditional practices and superstitions than on scientific knowledge. Despite their limited training, barber surgeons were crucial figures in medieval medicine, often operating in emergency conditions and representing the only hope for many patients. Number 4, the right of asylum in churches. The right of asylum, or ecclesiastical immunity, was a widely practiced concept in the Middle Ages that allowed criminals to temporarily escape civil justice by seeking refuge inside a church. Once the sacred threshold was crossed, the fugitive could remain safe, protected by church laws that prohibited secular authorities from forcibly entering to apprehend them. This right reflected the idea that the church was a place of mercy and refuge, an institution superior to earthly justice. However, the practice could also be abused, with criminals exploiting asylum to evade the consequences of their actions. Churches thus became sanctuaries for a variety of individuals, from thieves to rebels, complicating the task of secular authorities and sometimes generating tensions between ecclesiastical and civil power. Number 3, the dance of death. The dance of death, or dance macabre, was a very popular artistic and literary theme in the late Middle Ages, especially following the devastation of the Black Death. This macabre representation aimed to remind people of the inevitability of death, regardless of their social class, wealth, or power. In visual depictions, death was personified by skeletons dancing with people from all walks of life, from kings to peasants, emphasizing the equality of all before death. These works were often accompanied by texts urging penance and reflection on eternal life. The dance of death served as a memento mori, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the proximity of death, permeating medieval culture from painting to poetry and even religious ceremonies. Number 2, book burnings. In the Middle Ages, book burnings were dramatic public events, primarily organized by the church to destroy texts deemed heretical or dangerous to Christian orthodoxy. The medieval church, with its dominant power, viewed certain books as threats to faith and social order. Destroying books was not only an act of censorship, but also a way to eliminate ideas that challenged ecclesiastical authority. Among the texts most often burned were works of philosophy, science, and religion that contradicted official doctrine, as well as writings considered magical or superstitious. Book burnings were thus not only a means of cultural control, but also a manifestation of the struggle for control over ideas and knowledge in an era when ignorance was often seen as a virtue. Number 1, the practice of divine judgment. Divine judgment or ordeal. Divine judgment, or ordeal, was a medieval practice based on the belief that God directly intervened in human disputes to reveal the truth and administer justice. One of the most well-known examples of divine judgment was trial by combat, where two contenders fought each other in a physical duel. It was believed that God would ensure the victory of the innocent, thus revealing the truth through the outcome of the duel. Other forms of ordeal included trials by fire, water, or poison, where the accused had to survive a deadly or extremely painful test to prove their innocence. These practices, deeply rooted in faith and superstition, reflected a worldview where the divine directly intervened in human affairs, and where earthly justice was seen as an extension of divine will. Over time, with the evolution of law and jurisprudence, these practices were abandoned, giving way to trials based on evidence and testimony rather than acts of faith. That said, I hope I have provided you with a clear and in-depth view of some of the most extraordinary and fascinating practices and beliefs that were considered normal in the Middle Ages. Continue to follow us to discover more curiosities in upcoming videos. See you soon!